David, District Attorney for New Hanover and Pender County. And I'm so glad to be joined by so many of my teammates in the District Attorney's office. I've come here today with a very strong message. Black lives matter, and police violence of any kind is wrong. Now, I imagine that many people have stood on these steps over the last 2 weeks and have said that. But I've been raised to believe that actions speak louder than words. And what I ask anyone to do in this community or outside of it is to look at the actions of who it is who is the top prosecutor and the people in the district attorney's office and how they're fighting for justice for everyone. I stand by the record of the men and women of this office that I've been so privileged to lead for the last 16 years. First and foremost, we are not perfect, and we can all do better, and we must do better, and that's why we are here. We want to engage with the very people who are on these steps, saying that we are not against you. We are for sincere criminal justice reform, and we want this to be a better community than it is today. I also say that when we talk about Black Lives Mattering, let's look at who the victims of violent crime are, particularly in the port city. 8 out of 10 murder victims at the time I've been district attorney in Wilmington have been people of color and below the poverty line. A baby born at New Hanover Regional Medical Center today, 1 black and 1 white, 4.5 times more likely to be murdered in their lifetime if they have that black skin than if they have that white skin. That's not acceptable to anyone in my office, and it shouldn't be acceptable to anyone watching. For the last 21 years, I've been giving victims a voice at the courthouse. I speak for the dead in murder trials. I am the conscience for the community anytime a crime occurs, and so are the men and women of this office. What I encourage anybody to do is to talk to the families of these murder victims. Talk to the victims themselves if they're still with us. Ask them if we are fighting every day and upholding the value of equal protection under the law. Now, I want to say something also about police violence. What happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd is murder and nothing less, and I've said that repeatedly to anyone who would listen. And when the doors closed in my office and in any law enforcement agency I've been to over this last month, I can tell you that that's the same conversation I've heard again and again. What happened was horrific and should not be tolerated in any society. We also have things in place in this district that would call out an officer like the one who murdered George Floyd years before that incident happened. We have something in this district called the Giglio policy that started in 2013, which looks at the internal affairs records of every officer, all 1,000 officers in 20 different police agencies, going back over a 10-year period up to that point. If there is any bias, in other words, profiling, if there is any use of force that might implicate someone's truthfulness, if there is lying in the course of an internal affairs investigation, I have 3 prosecutors, senior prosecutors, like my first assistant, Barrett Temple, who heads that unit and looks at every single officer and their conduct. We have taken drastic action in the past to dismiss pending cases when we believe that that officer no longer has credibility or should wear the badge. We have sent letters to law enforcement heads and sheriff's offices to say they are no longer welcome in our courthouse as witnesses, and we will dismiss any case moving forward. And we have been doing that for several years. As chairman of the Best Practices Committee in North Carolina for district attorneys, I have also asked that to be implemented in all 44 judicial districts, and I encourage people to look into putting that into law. It's named after a Supreme Court case from the United States in the mid-1970s, and is already case law. It should be statutory law. Now, speaking of reform, there's also a lot of discussion about having a police citizens advisory board. I am in favor of looking at doing that, and I've commissioned a group headed again by my first assistant and members of the Community Justice Advisory Council to undertake that important work. We are aware of other communities, such as Charlotte, for instance, who have done that. I've reached out to my counterparts like Spencer Merriweather there, who's the district attorney, city attorneys, including John Joy, who used to work in Charlotte, said, let's get to work and see if we can get something like that in place in Wilmington. I want to pause, though, for a minute to say that the First Amendment not only gives you the right to say F the police, it gives me the right to say, I don't agree with that statement. In fact, we need to be praising the police. I say I am not the police attorney, I'm the district attorney, and not all police officers, just like not all prosecutors, are perfect. And if they're racist, if they're violent, they should absolutely be drummed out of the ranks. But that is an outlier, and we need to understand that that's an outlier. Do what Michael Jordan did 4 years ago when police were getting targeted for murder in Dallas, and 5 of them were killed. He lost his father to a crime of violence, a murder just down the road in Lumberton. And because the Lord has blessed him with great resources, he was able to give $2 million. $1 million to the NAACP and $1 million to the Policemen's Benevolent Association. And he said we need to support both right now. And that's what I would say to anyone who's listening. We don't need to defund the police, we need to refund them. That means we don't need to get them to do all the jobs that, frankly, other people need to be doing. Things like bringing people back to life with Narcan, and we brought back hundreds and hundreds of people in this district doing that. That should be peer specialists, it should be medical providers, it should be mental health counselors who show up at scenes. The Quick Response Team by Coastal Horizon Center is exactly that effort to do that. I say the same thing in our school resource officers and mental health counseling for our children. We need to have more mental health counselors in schools. We need to have more support for our children. We're asking the police to do too much right now, and I hope that's what is meant when we talk about refunding the police.
Yes.
Because it's absolutely the case that we are doing things in this district that I say are cutting edge and are mattering. For instance, let's get back to our school children. Judge Jay Corpening, our Chief District Court Judge, and I started a program a few years ago to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. This is the idea that children, instead of going to the principal's office, were getting arrested. This happened because after Columbine 21 years ago, and then after Newtown 7 years ago, more and more police started being put in schools, particularly elementary schools. And things that used to go to the principal's office were suddenly coming down to the courthouse. We work with school resource officers, we work with principals, and we said, let's make these teachable moments rather than criminal records. In just 1 year, we reduced the criminal filings of juvenile petitions by over 52%. And that has been sustained now for a 3-year period. But we didn't stop there. Judge Corpening and I were the only 2 officials from the justice system to go before the legislature and demand that we raise the juvenile age from 16 to 18. Because you're not an adult at 16, you're an adult at 18. And a nonpartisan group listened to us, and they unanimously passed that into law, which went into effect December 1st of last year. And that's a good moment for North Carolina. Doing justice also means loving mercy, and we do that particularly with our children. I also want to say something about mass incarceration. You know, there's a lot of rumors out there and myths that we need to explode. There are no private prisons in North Carolina. It costs a whole lot to incarcerate. It costs about $85 a day at our New Hanover County Jail, and there's about 500 people at any given moment at our jail. There's another 37,000 in the prisons of North Carolina that cost about $35,000 a year. I have long advocated, and I encourage you to watch, the Press Club's national press conference that I delivered with the chiefs of police from Houston, Chicago, New Orleans, sitting right next to me as I delivered the remarks on law enforcement leaders to end mass incarceration 5 years ago. This is right before we met with President Obama. I was privileged to be the voice of the nation's prosecutors to do that. It wasn't even covered locally, and it was on the cover of the New York Times. Why did we say law enforcement leaders should end mass incarceration? Not just because it's expensive, but because it's immoral. It is immoral to put young people of color in prisons. It is immoral to put drug-addicted people and mentally ill people in prisons. And so what we did as law enforcement leaders, without fear of the next election, we said, we're here to stop mass incarceration. How have we done? Because again, these are just words. How have we done? As president of the District Attorneys Association 7 years ago, I helped rewrite the laws in North Carolina called Justice Reinvestment. That basically said that we were no longer going to put people in prison for drug addiction and for mental illness. We were going to put them into treatment instead. In the last 7 years, we have closed 11 prisons in North Carolina. Not opened them, we've closed 11 prisons, reducing the prison population by 4,000 beds. That's 10% of the prison population. Saving $500 million in the process to be reinvested into all the things that we need to be doing. And so what are we doing to build community and not just more prisons here in North Carolina? I say that there's 5 arms of the starfish, and if you go to newhanoverda.com, you'll see the 5 arms of the starfish that I'm talking about. These are our arms of outreach that all of these folks go into the community to do. I give every one of my employees 2 hours off each week to go volunteer in the community in places like the Youth Enrichment Zone, to read to kids in schools, to go work at the Domestic Violence Shelter and Services, to work with victims of human trafficking, to go be basketball coaches, to go be reading tutors. And I've been doing that for the 16 years I've been district attorney. The 5 arms of the starfish in no particular order is the government arm, the schools, the business community, the nonprofits, and the faith-based community. I've already told you about some of the reforms I've hoped to champion and will be championing moving forward in that government arm of the starfish. Let's talk quickly about the other ones. I mentioned the schools. Stopping the school-to-prison pipeline not only worked here, it's now a statewide commission, and I give Jay Corpening, our Chief District Court Judge, immense credit for that. And again, we passed into law since December 1st, raising the juvenile age. With the business community, I created something with Live Oak Bank, Chip Mahan, CEO, called Hometown Hires. This was something that great employers like Ray Worrell and Slice of Life have utilized. When someone gets out of the criminal justice system and has done their time, we say welcome all the way back to society. Because the street's an equal opportunity employer, and we need people back to work and not on that street corner. In the last 5 years, we've put 1,000 people back to work through that Hometown Hires program. It's now called Step Up Ministries. I invite you to go to their website to learn more about how you can hire somebody to do that. Overwhelmingly, these are folks who have criminal records and are people of color living below the poverty line. Now, when we talk about Hometown Hires, we also had the expungement laws to contend with. This is removing people's nonviolent records after they've demonstrated that they have reformed, rehabilitated, and are no longer committing offenses. We held an expungement clinic right down the street at the library about 3 years ago. 500 people showed up. The district attorney's office ran that, not the public defender's office, because we're the real public defender's office. We're the real ones giving victims a voice, and people living in poverty are. Just one nonviolent conviction on someone's record reduces their future earning potential by 40%. We have created a permanent underclass in this country. And so what the men and women of my office did is we said, we're going to welcome you all the way back to society and be the attorneys to take you into that courthouse and get your record removed if you're eligible.
Can you do that again?
And because so many people weren't eligible, not only are we calling to do that again, and Lily, I'll talk to you about how we can, but we've also created a new law that got signed into law last week by Roy Cooper, our former Attorney General and current governor. I was the only prosecutor in the state of North Carolina to stand before the legislature back again last fall to say we are going to advocate for the Second Chances Act that not only greatly expands eligibility for expunction, but makes it automatic in cases of dismissals and not guilties, so that you don't have to hire that civil attorney, because 98% of people who were eligible were not seeking that relief because there was a barrier to access to the courthouse because of money. Now, when we talk about the next arm of the Starfish and nonprofits, I ask you to look at the work we've done in our Youth Enrichment Zone through the Blue Ribbon Commission, a group that I work with so many faith leaders, business leaders, and government leaders, all 5 arms of the Starfish, to create back in 2008. That is a group that just got to work in the highest crime, highest poverty area, the north side of Wilmington, right behind where we stand now, all the way up to Creekwood. And what we said is, we're going to give kids a second chance who have records, but we're also going to start steering them to a better life before they get them. We don't need to just worry about the courthouse or the schoolhouse, we need to go to the child's house. And so what we did is we actually went right into those neighborhoods and said, we are going to reduce violent crime involving our young people by 25% in 3 years. That was our goal. We reduced it by 28% in that 3-year period, and we did that by increasing graduation rates by about that same number. There's a direct and inverse correlation between graduation and crime. The key to poverty, getting out of that, always goes through the schoolhouse, and we understood that and worked with the school leaders, not just to open DC Virgo, but also create GLOW Academy, the all-girls charter school, and I hope you have Judy Gerard and her team on these very steps, because no one is doing more to fight for the future of Wilmington more than the men and women who run GLOW Academy. We have some great young leaders coming out of there who I can't wait to hire one day. The final nonprofit piece I'll tell you about is through the faith-based community. Because while the First Amendment says that church and state shall remain separate, we absolutely reach out to faith leaders to say, these are God's children dying in the streets of Wilmington, not black or white children. And so what we did is we took over that old jail the year I became district attorney. They moved the location to Blue Clay Road. And when they did, they said, we've got this hollowed out facility. What do we do with it? Well, on the courthouse and the church that started at First Baptist Church, in the middle we had this hollowed out jail. We created a nonprofit center with 20 nonprofit agencies, everything from human trafficking to domestic violence to drug treatment to mental health counseling to that hometown hires group that I mentioned. We put them on the top floor. Philippians Ministries, the list goes on and on. The point is, if we're trying to get people out of that cul-de-sac of despair called poverty, if we're trying to help victims, if we're trying to prevent other people from returning to the justice system after they get out, because 2 out of 3 people who are getting out of jail are back in that jail cell within 3 years under the current rates of recidivism, we have to work together as a community to do that. We can't just do that at the courthouse. That requires all of us. So I'm going to end with this before I ask you to have any questions to the whole team and me. We have a real responsibility right now, everybody, to do justice, not just the men and women of the district attorney's office. We can do that by building community. I invite everyone listening to go online to newhanoverda.com and see something that I've authored called Crime and Community in the Cape Fear. It is a class that we teach every year to approximately 200 citizens. And what we are attempting to do,
you got to tell how much it is and where it's located,
though. It's located online this year because UNCW said it has to be online, Lily Nicole. We cannot teach it in person like we used to at the Lumina Theater. I will give you all the available information. As for the cost, that is still an evolving question because it is online now. I will tell you, and I make this commitment, anyone who wants to take that class and can't afford it, you'd only send me an email and I will make sure every cost is covered. No one will be denied because they feel they cannot afford it. We have people from the OLLI program, OSHA Lifelong Learners, many retired. We have police officers. We have school teachers. We have 18-year-olds that are freshmen at UNCW and everyone in between. We are building community around the idea that it takes all 5 arms in the starfish around a public health model. Because I haven't even mentioned the key to all of this, which are healthy children, healthy relationships, absolutely a strong adherence to ACE scores and the resiliency task force that's going on in this community. We are all engaged in those efforts to do that. I'm Ben David, and I'm here to tell you that Black Lives Matter to me is not a tagline. It's my life's work. Just ask any victim who is still with us or any family member who I spoke for in a courtroom. And it is the mission of the district attorney's office. No one is above the law. No one is beneath its protection. And as long as I'm district attorney, I commit that we are going to continue to uphold the Constitution in the most imperfect way that we can because we're all humans. But we are working towards a more perfect union. And I want to do that with everybody who's on these steps as well. Thank you all very much for hearing me out. And with that, I'll ask any questions. Yeah.
Some people are asking, that's nice what you have done, but what do you plan on doing going forward as far as listening to us, working with us to build the community? Because that's what we're trying to do. They want to know, what do you plan to do, not only with us, but for the community?
You have a seat at the table. In fact, Lily Nicole, you can correct me. I think I was the first public official to reach out to you to request a 3-hour meeting 10 days ago. If there were others, that's great. I hope there were. I'm going to continue to hear from you. In fact, the reason that I've not had more conversations, I think it's important for a guy like me to listen right now. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I want to hear what you guys are thinking and feeling and take a lot of the energy that I see out here into that very courthouse. I absolutely commit to having a dialogue with you moving forward. That's what this is all about. And by the way, the police are hiring and so am I. So don't just say truth to power, become powerful. Don't just question authority, be the authority. I'm requesting all of you who are so engaged with wanting to do justice to walk into that courthouse and see what we do every day and become a part of this great team. I'm so privileged to lead them. That is the greatest accomplishment of this office, is the men and women who work in it. Next question. Yes.
You spoke on employment, your programs for employment in the interest of reducing recidivism rates. Yes. What about housing? Many apartment complexes, many private renters in Wilmington flat out will not rent to felons.
Right.
Having a felony automatically excludes you from the larger majority of housing in Wilmington. And it's not just unemployment that leads to recidivism. If you can't find a place to live, you're going to end up back in the same place. So that's something we need to address.
Thank you for the question. For those of you who couldn't hear, he asked about housing and what we're doing about that. Affordable housing is a crisis here in the Port City. There's too many apartments going up. We need to take care of the people who have been here for generations. A couple of things. The reason we started that expungement clinic was not as much for economic opportunities as it relates to jobs as it was to get them eligible again for housing. Because you're right. Section 8 vouchers, you're not allowed to live in public housing if you have that even one nonviolent felony. And so we're trying to reunite families with each other because some people had to make a terrible choice of living with their kids or living with the man who was their father. And we shouldn't be separating families through the policies that are currently in place. What we're trying to do, and again, a lot of these are civil issues, and that's why I brought great civil attorneys with me, like Michael Davenport, who's my personal attorney when I need something. This is a multifaceted approach. There's over 900 attorneys in Wilmington. There's only one district attorney. I want to work with those private attorneys to say we need to do more in the civil arenas to do that. And I absolutely invite the City Council, County Commission to look more at affordable housing. I know they've got commissions on that. I believe more people should be at the table when we're talking about what the future of Wilmington looks like.
Well, aside from affordable housing, I mean even just private housing being allowed to
So if there's
rent to
discrimination
felons,
based on,
exactly.
on landlords not renting to
And
any
apartment
protected
complexes.
class, that is protected under the laws and it needs to be enforced. Again, it needs to be reported and then it needs to be brought into a courtroom when it is. I'll tell you one of the proudest moments I've had as your district attorney is when we convened a Know Your Rights session a few years ago. This again was at the height of the police violence that Michael Jordan decried 4 years ago. Donnie Williams and others, we went into the very places where he grew up and we went into the houses of faith and we held a Know Your Rights session where we said there's a Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizures. You have the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent in counsel. We want your rights to be protected, and if you are getting profiled, you need to report that. I asked the question, raise your hand if you feel like you've been stopped in a car because of the color of your skin. Many, many hands went up. The second question I asked was, how many of you have reported that? And the answer was none. I can tell you that now Donnie Williams is chief. He and I have already spoken about this, and he has said he wants to have someone dedicated in his office just to receiving citizens' complaints. We handle over 50,000 traffic tickets in my district every year. We can see who gets stopped. We have conversations with people when they do. I invite you to come into traffic court and watch what we're doing. We dismiss many cases that are what are called pretext stops, registration and inspection violations where the car is fixed, minor traffic offenses. I invite you to look at the work of these men and women here to see what they're doing. We don't tolerate that, but we won't know about it unless it's reported. You need to report that to the police agency who stopped you, and if you're not getting anywhere with that, you can go to NewHanoverDistrictAttorney.com or PenderDistrictAttorney.com and reach out to the men and women of my office. Next question.
What are your opinion regarding the statues and this wonderful protection that they are wasting resources on?
I appreciate the question. I'll first say that I endorse what Historic Wilmington Foundation has already said. I believe that the equal protection that we uphold every day at the courthouse is at odds with the message that's with these Confederate monuments right next door. And so I applaud what the Historic Wilmington Foundation said. Again, not to duck it, there are civil laws that are in place that can safely remove them. And Lily Nicole, I want to thank you in particular because we had a very sincere conversation about this 10 days ago. You committed to me that you were going to let time and the process through the lawful means do that in terms of making sure that the very community that put him up 100 years ago, while they're not alive today, it would mean a lot more if the community that's in power right now be a part of that discussion, and I think that they are, and that is happening. If we need to continue that discussion, we will. But the full answer to your question is, I believe that they should be safely moved and relocated where we can remember that history, but not honor it next to a courthouse where equal protection is in place. Next question. Yes.
I have a question about qualified immunity. I didn't know anything about qualified immunity until all of this came to light.
Sure.
Can you explain to us what is qualified immunity and how do you think it could be revised?
Sure. So, and I invite some of my prosecutors to weigh in as well. Qualified immunity basically says that when you act in your capacity as an officer, you're not going to get civilly sued for the things that arise in the course of your employment. And that's because who would do that job if they would subject the loss of their livelihood? They're already subjecting the loss of their life potentially every day they put on this thing. And so the qualified immunity provisions are the idea that if they are acting in their official capacity, it's called sovereign immunity, then it should be the government who has to pay. Just as one small example. When an officer used force back in December 1st, 2006, here in Wilmington, I stood alone in saying that that officer should be charged with second-degree murder. There weren't any protests. The victim happened not to be African-American. He happened to be part white and part Lumbee and Indian. So there was no protest. Nonetheless, we went into that grand jury room and said, we are seeking an indictment. When they failed to return that indictment, and they failed again to return an indictment for voluntary manslaughter by the Attorney General's office, Roy Cooper, who submitted that indictment, the family was then able to sue the sovereign, meaning New Hanover County, because it was a sheriff's office case, and the county paid out $2.3 million, not the individual officer. So families still have the right to sue the government right now, but only sue the officers if they go outside of their immunity and act in their personal capacity. Jared, is there anything else you want to say to that? Because I know you chair the Giglio committee.
No, I would just add that with regards to qualified immunity, and I know that's one of the phrases that people are saying a lot with how we can refigure policing in America. With any civil suit, you can only get money or monetary recovery if there's something to get. Typically, the county's got more money than the individual officer anyway. So from my perspective, qualified immunity is not so much perhaps where the solution may be.
So
I agree with that.
my question is, does it prevent an officer from being held accountable?
Does it protect an officer from being held accountable? Well, first of all, if they act in violation of the criminal laws, we put them before that grand jury. And again, I just invite you to look through history on that. They also face potential loss of their own job, and that's happened many times. They face Giglio impairment, which again follows them for 10 years, and if it rises to an appropriate level, they get what we call the death letter, which means we send it to law enforcement and say they're never testifying again in this district. And she and I have had to draft that letter on many occasions. So you can lose your livelihood. You can lose, in other words, not just your job, but your very freedom if you act in a criminal way, and even not criminal, but short of that in the Giglio fashion. So I think what Barrett is saying, what I'm saying, many of the things that I believe protesters are talking about already allow victims' families to sue and get money for that. Just ask the families who have done that in the past. And they do not protect officers in those jobs from those things the way that we have it set up now.
So, but the guy never felt like although he faced criminal charges, he was not indicted or convicted. Is that correct?
That's right, but he was fired within 24 hours.
So like my thought is like, I think the reason why officers act with impunity is because at the end of the day, he lost his job, but I'm sure he has another one now, and he didn't have to pay $2.whatever million.
He doesn't have a job in law enforcement. I agree with you that
how do you convict these guys?
we need to know, listen, to whom much is expected, to whom much is given, much is expected, right? And I totally believe that, not just with the men and women of my office, but obviously the men and women of law enforcement. When we started the Giglio policy, what we were saying is integrity has to start with us. We should be the first ones to drum out of our ranks anyone who has a racial bias, anyone who's acting in a violent manner, anyone who is untruthful. That's what the Giglio policy says. I hear you when you say you want people to be held civilly accountable and criminally accountable. And I say, point to the scoreboard here in Wilmington over the last 16 years I've been district attorney, and the men and women of this office have been in that office alongside me. Again, I am not here, and you've missed the message if it's to hear how perfect we are. We are humans who do the very best that we can every day. I promise you, people don't work in my office if they don't come and bring it every day, upholding that Constitution we all take into account. But what I do say is that there are good people who are trying. And what I respectfully suggest is, let's support the men and women of law enforcement, just like the men and women in my office, who are sincere about protecting the community. They're not warriors, they're guardians. That means they need to go into the communities where justice is most needed. Those are in high poverty areas, and be that light in the darkness. That's why we have that new substation built right across the street in our youth enrichment zone. The Donnie helped champion right before he became chief. In fact, that was Ralph Evangelos' final thing that he asked to be done. I know the heart of my sheriff, I know the heart of my chief, I talk to all of them. You don't have to always agree with us. That is not why I'm here. And whether you vote for me or not, no one's run against me in the last 4 elections. This is not a stump speech. What I'm telling you is we're going to continue to fight for the victims of crime, and overwhelmingly we know who they are and what they look like, and they are somebody's baby, and we have always handled cases like that. We are not going to tolerate any abuse by any authority, whoever they are, whether they wear a badge or in any kind of privilege, and we will stand on our record with that too. Lily Nicole, you have the final question.
Yes, I have last 2 things from the audience. One is a statement that leads into the question. It says, if they aren't warriors, then stop applying them with warrior gear. But that leads into the question, with the excessive cannabis charges in the past, why are you or your office... Cannabis charges. Why are you guys prosecuting cannabis charges when you yourself have family and friends who are known cannabis users and other people standing behind you?
Yeah. So
they feel it's very hypocritical.
We're talking now about marijuana. Let's again explode that myth. There is no one languishing in New Hanover County for marijuana.
When you say languishing, can you explain languishing?
Yes, no one is in our jail, and find them. Send me the mugshot. If there's anyone in our jail that is there for marijuana possession, you let me know. Here's what we have done every day I've been district attorney. We make that not only mandatory no jail, but we make that mandatory deferred prosecution, which means it's not going to be on your record. If you want the laws changed, you need to go to Raleigh and change them, and I'm not going to fight you on that. What I will say is that if 2 17-year-olds are smoking today, one smoking a cigarette and the other smoking a joint, the one who's smoking a cigarette is punished more harshly under North Carolina right now than the one who's smoking a joint. Class 2 misdemeanor versus Class 3. And that's been like that for 25 years I've been the district attorney and been a lawyer. And the 21 years I've been district attorney. I will say that as it relates to what we try to do, by the way, at the local level with a cannabis charge, homeless person who can't afford bond. So Ray Jaziri works at the sheriff's office, but physically works in the DA's office every day. If there is a person, and you ask about languishing, Lily, if there is a person who is there because they can't afford a bond and they're nonviolent, they don't have a bad record, we believe they should be out now. We don't wait for anybody to get appointed on that. We are advocating for that right away. And so what we do, just so you know, we have released over 1,000 people through this program, saving over 74 years in jail combined, and saving over $3 million in the cost of incarceration and $85 a day, just in the 3 years that Ray's been working doing that job. And so again, you can talk to me about bail reform next. I think we need to end cash bail in America, and I want to work with you all to do that. I can talk to you about many reforms on the substantive laws that include cannabis and many other things. We have to enforce the laws. We're the executive branch. The legislative branch passes the laws, and the judges interpret them. I do believe in the separation of powers and the balance of powers and checks and balances. And we do very well to have these discussions so that we can inform the people who are writing the laws the best way to keep everyone safe. There are many rewrites to our laws that we can do moving forward, but really what this comes down to more than anything is having good people in place. That means good people in the justice system, to be clear, but good people on these steps demanding that we do better. And I appreciate the energy behind that, and I want you to know that I am not an adversary if you're here for sincere criminal justice reform. I promised my team, because it's 1 o'clock, that they would get back to the courthouse at this time. We will absolutely stay around for any more of your questions. Thank you all very much for giving us time.
Thank you, Mr. Dan. Love the couple. All right. Okay. And I was 50 years ago. I'm so proud of them. They continue this fight. They have this rolling on. Yeah. Sometimes it's really slow. Yeah. Now, this company statues, one of my father's statues, when I came up, going to Rolling Light Street, just integrated. At Houston Park, I ain't the other kids walking. We talked to a president in that park. We done.
We're talking about, what year was this?
1971.
We're talking about the Wilmington 10 time?
I'm talking about the time that we were kids.
Yeah.
This situation here was we were kids living in that block, one school. And he with guns down up, and they were coming to school in Harvard.
So,
Listen,
yeah, I'm listening.
The police escorted us from the school to protect us, innocent.
Right.
That's why to me, places like East Park would never be something to represent this city and call it part of this city.
Yeah.
It's a bad memory.
It's a terrible memory.
That needs to be
I was
erased.
Let me tell you how I tried to erase that history. And again, I was 1 year old in 1971, but here's what I heard about it. I heard that the Wilmington 10 were prosecuted under a trial that had terrible prosecutorial misconduct. I worked with Tim Tyson, who is the author of Blood Done Sign My Name. We started a class 10 years ago called The History of Wilmington in Black and White. I don't know if you heard about it. That's where I was introduced to the fact that Dr. King was supposed to be here on the day he was killed. You remember, Mary Williams and Tim Tyson were the code teachers. When I found out about that, we went through the box of documents from the prosecutor, Jay Stroud, who tried that case. We recognized that he was intentionally excluding African Americans from that jury in gross violation of what the law is, which is something called Batson versus Kentucky. We took that to Governor Perdue, and on the last day that she was governor, she pardoned the Wilmington 10.
Yes, but you know who the Wilmington 10 was? There was just 10 black guys that were picked. It could have been me.
They were 9 black guys and 1 white.
I know they'll just pick that right.
Yeah, and so again, when we see an injustice, however far back, what we're saying is that's not okay. I cannot erase the history that we have. What I can say is that we are committed to writing a history every day at the courtworth, and that's what's called precedent.
I'm the first one to applaud you on that, because I'm telling you, what I'm telling you is the reality of the situation is much worse than you pretend it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the situation with the statues,
Yeah.
it's much worse
Yeah.
than you pretend it is. You want to pretend it's all right. It's not all right, because you know you cannot reward people for doing wrong.
Can I get you to do this? And I don't know if I was clear on this. I appreciate how patient you all have been with these statues. It's one of those things where I believe it'll be much better if the community comes around this and says, this is what we want, not just what a few people want. And I have a job to do if people deface or do graffiti or rip something down. I hope you understand that. We're a nation of laws, and there are laws on the books that can do that, and I think we need to work together to make that happen. That's where I think we need to be. I ask for a little bit of patience on that. I promise you, the wheels of justice flow grind a little bit slower than you
I know we are addicted to laws, but my biggest problem is the law that states equal justice for all is being overlooked. For men.
We're trying our best, and I agree that there's a lot of work we can do.
I see the work you do.
Yeah, there's a lot of work we're trying to do on implicit bias, on de-escalation, on some of the trainings that I believe not just police need, but some of the prosecutors in my office do. We are not just having this conversation now. We've been doing that for a while, and are going to continue to do that.
And when it comes to policing, I think police should police themselves. Good cops have to stop bad cops. They cannot do it.
That's right.
That's not their job. Their job, the good cop's job is to police the bad cops. So what I'm trying to say is we got some great officers in this town.
We do.
But they need to know that if they do their job, you will stand behind them.
They have that commitment from me, and I hope that's always been clear.
And you know, I feel as though like situation happened with George Floyd. Those cops feel like they'll help this. They couldn't do nothing, so they feel like nobody was going to represent. I don't know whether this situation here.
Officers have a duty to act.
We got some great officers here.
Yeah.
And
Well,
they need
thank
to
you
be
for saying
able to
that.
do what they need
Talk
to do.
to some of the other people on the steps, because that sign to me is. I understand the anger,
I'm not angry.
and I'm not
I'm
not
just stating the
defending.
truth.
I hear what you're saying. I believe we can do better working together. Is I guess my big message on it.
Oh yeah, you do. Just listen. I'm not mad. I'm just trying to feel.
You should be mad.
I'm trying to feel what find. No, that's what we don't good. I'm trying to feel a way to get glad.
Yeah.
Like I'm glad to see these people.
Yeah,
Thank you.
right on.
All right.
I don't know if you'll shake hands and go.
Oh yeah.
Some people were saying in response to the community wanting these taken down, there's several petitions that are going around that have multiple community member signatures and stars that have been in our community signing. So they're saying for that statement, there is the community asking for it to take it down. That's point A. And then point B, someone wanted to bring up that we did talk to you about like a way that we can get it done locally without like waiting for that 90-day removal to get a local bill proposed. And the question is, what is your stance and what have you done to follow up on that? Because those are two things that we could do immediately and they need to be addressed.
To the Attorney General, I got the interpretation of the statute that gives local control, and I've sent that to City Council. I promise you, there's good work being done on that. And again, I just ask for patience while the legal processes are being done.
And one last thing, I just want to say, I just want to go on record that the lowercase leaders and the community that's out here, we've never like attempted to deface it. We've only ever suggested, I just have to go on record, we've only ever suggested a compromise of them being moved. So before people get the kickback and like the little random perimeters, that is uncalled for because we've never gone down there to try to mess that up.
To be very clear, I want to stay in my lane. That's a personal opinion to Ben David. As district attorney, that's a civil issue, and I have sent the civil laws to the people with power to do something. I have a duty to enforce the criminal laws, and I think I've been pretty clear on there's not going to be violence or chaos in the wake of this. We want peaceful protest, and we want a civil debate on moving forward together, and I believe we're doing that, and I appreciate this opportunity to be here today.
Sweet, thank you.
God bless each and every one of you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.